the ancient was remarkably able to announce and foretell the advent of plagues and of various sicknesses, and also of determining the critical period of sickness in the life of an individual who was stricken. He was very capable of using this knowledge in diagnosis, and his patients survived in some miraculous manner, perhaps almost as well, if not entirely as well, as many of those of today. Out of this thinking, the ancient came to the opinion that Saturn and Mars had a particular relationship to epidemical disease, that these two constituted the ancient killers, and that Jupiter became involved to the degree that he represented mass, multitude, number. Whatever happened under the influence of Jupiter became increasingly expansive and had a large area or theater of action. Therefore, if Saturn and Mars were in evil association with each other, and Jupiter became involved in this pattern, something of an epidemical or grand nature might be regarded as likely. Now these same calculations have been revised with the addition of Uranus and Neptune. Up to now, not much has been done in such detail with the recent planet Lowell Pluto. But the other two have been considered, and they are found to combine very strongly with Mars and Saturn, so that we have four great planetary masses: Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, and Mars. And all of these have a very definite bearing upon certain periodic recurrences in atmospheric conditions. Now, the relationships of these to atmosphere must also be regarded as adding other factors to the pattern. And the old astrologer, looking into this, came to the conclusion that man is subject to many epidemical ailments other than those which can be physically diagnosed. That just as surely as he can have the whooping cough or the measles, so he can have a series of humors, or he can develop attitudes. The ancients did not have our modern psychological terminology, but what they are telling us is that various attitudes, individual and collective, can be due to these things. And that such an attitude, as we will say, as a recession, which we are beginning to speculate on at the moment, can also be due to great numbers of persons under certain debility of vitality. And that wherever individuals lose a certain measure of energy, they begin to think negatively. And whatever problem is besetting them at the moment, the problem becomes bigger as they feel less well. Whereas healthy persons, by nature optimistic, will attack a problem. Less healthy persons, not so optimistic, will permit the problem to attack them, and as a result come into serious trouble. Also, that under certain types of energy, particularly the energy of Uranus, individuals function under extraordinary tension. That instead of doing things in a relaxed and natural manner, they become stress-ridden. That it seems as though some kind of an irritating electrical current was coursing through them, which will never let them rest, will never let them do anything in an easy manner. And even when they have nothing to do particularly, still they cannot let down. They are under this constant urge And our ancient brethren were of the opinion that this urge is due to certain electrical currents, and that humanity divides into several groups. One group is composed of persons comparatively immune to this urge because it does not have chemical or psychochemical affinity to them. This urge can move through a group of persons, but there are always some who will not respond because their own polarities will not respond. The individuality of the person is sufficiently strong to prevent response. The magnetic field of the individual does not chemically react to the magnetic influences in the same way because of a different basic polarization. Like the case of a radio that is turned on to a certain station, other programs will not be received by that adjustment. And the individual, having a certain adjustment, tunes in certain things. And in that way, those listening to that program will be affected by it. Others will not, perhaps except indirectly. So this pressure moving through space will, however, catch on to a great number of persons, producing a sufficient response to upset an economic situation or to drive a highly tense people into a state of war. It can mean that under this pressure, certain vitalities are inhibited, certain judgment is reduced, irritation is increased, and a group of persons who might otherwise be quiet and law-abiding citizens suddenly become a mass of irritated individuals. And with irritation present, there is always something that we can find to be an object for that irritation. And this in turn can result in marked rises in death rates, marked lowering of birth rate, marked increase in divorce, marked increase in crime, marked increase in alcoholism, and all of the various escape mechanisms which become operative under the pressure of a general situation. Now, whether the individual is going to react or not, and the degree of his reaction may be determined by his own nature. And the older people believed that therefore, if it was not adjusted to him by his own nature, the effect would not be felt. Therefore, his own stars had to be examined also to determine whether he was sensitive to this condition. But that there would be enough persons sensitive to a broad situation, that by its stimulation, world patterns could change, world situations could change, and therefore that to a measure world health would be affected. The ancient was fully aware that there had to be a sound mind in a sound body in order for health to follow. If the body was corrupted, it was a disaster. If the mind in the body was corrupted, it was a greater disaster. But that you are either healthy or you are sick. And that where you are sick, the sickness is either due to your attitude or to conditions affecting your body. That your attitude may also affect your body. But the body, being composed of material elements, was also under the domination of certain material forces operating constantly in the universe. Thus a philosophy was gradually developed, integrated and pointed. And from this philosophy a number of rather interesting and relevant points can be gathered. One of these, perhaps the most general one, is paralleling the idea that Plato had, that the world itself was subject to alternate periods of fertility and sterility. We know that throughout history, world activities and events break into patterns, that these patterns are bounded by years, that one generation is given to arts and another to sciences, that at one time man develops tremendous ingenuity in music, and in another time, as now, he is immersed in electronics. Different eras, different patterns seem to direct his interest, and through this leadership affect his world. Man, by nature an extremist, however, nearly always gets into trouble with his own inventions. He is unable to be moderate, and he is not sufficiently broad in his understanding to consider the secondary consequences of the things he does. He feels that he will accomplish a certain thing, but he does not know how to get away from the inevitable negative misuse of that which he accomplishes. So every blessing has a curse within it, and every curse may be a blessing in disguise. These things are polarized, and the individual, creating a new life pattern, brings himself inevitably under both the positive and negative aspects of that pattern. The positive aspects are progress, and for the most part, the negative aspects are sickness. Under the existing world shape of things now, we perceive a strong increase in epidemical disease. We observe a strong increase in that great disease, tension. We are using every means possible to fight this tension ailment. And we are going back to Hippocrates, who insisted that the intensities of man afflicted his flesh, and that he cannot live badly inside and have a healthy external life. Now, when you start to work with people, however, who have these intensities, you come upon a very interesting thing that is as mysterious as weather. And that mystery is their own climate. The individual, for the most part, lives in a kind of way of life that no matter how unsatisfactory it may be, he loves it devoutly. No matter how much misery it has caused him, he has little, if any, inclination to change. Always he is confronted with a twofold path, what he should do and what he wants to do. And in 99 cases out of 100, he will assume that what he wants to do is inevitable, and therefore that there is no use resisting in any way. Even the thought of resistance begins to convey the impulse of arduous effort, and that in itself is paralyzing. Man with a tremendous capacity to work hard doing nothing can find little, if any, energy to work slightly doing something. He considers all self-improvement labor, whereas the performance of those things that make him sick, this is a real joy, a real self-expression. He also feels that he is a human being with an inalienable right to do what he pleases, even though the result pleases no one. It is this strange apathy which leaves the person with no probability of reform except some kind of a change in his own climate. He has to have a different degree of humidity in order to combat the degree of stupidity with which he is afflicted. And this change, when it does come, is like the departure of an epidemic. No one seems to know why it goes any more than why it came. The individual will occasionally wake up in the morning and decide to live a different kind of life and go and do it. But you cannot directly trace this in the majority of instances to anyone's influence on him. Perhaps he has been collectively exposed to something and has come to like it. But why one morning he gets up and does it, no one seems to know. Why another person in an equally difficult situation will never do anything about it is also equally a mystery of life. Out of this situation, however, that no one really wishes to curb himself, limit his own pleasures, or protect the common good at his own expense. While this goes on, we have situations collectively such as the Southern California smog. We also have situations in which a similar kind of smog affected a number of villages in France. And probably most of you are aware that one of these curious village problems, one in France and one in Belgium, resulted in a very sharp loss of life. A kind of miasma settled over the area. It was preceded, by the way, by a long period of calm without wind. And it seems that whenever this calmness became too extended in the area, there was danger. By a parallel, it has been noted that long periods without rain in areas where rain is normally abundant frequently announce an earthquake. Therefore, certain magnetic fields are grounded by rain. And wherever we come into a difficult situation, we are often likely to find drought or lack of water. On the other hand, there are certain ailments that are the deadly enemy of rain, and rain is their greatest friend in perpetuating themselves. This means that there is more than one such atmospheric phenomenal ailment, and there is undoubtedly a kind of ailment that is rooted in any unusual type of natural phenomenon. In other words, as Hippocrates and Galen both pointed out, the normalcy of man is rooted in the normalcy of nature. And whenever nature becomes disturbed, man must inevitably also be disturbed. So health arises from a normalcy of things. And the great protection that man can create is a protection of normalcy within and around himself, especially when he is in the presence of any abnormal situation arising in nature. Thus, floods and disasters in nature will create abnormal situations which almost immediately increase the death rate of human beings. And wherever we find a natural catastrophe, we know that we must move in immediately with sanitation and medicine, or this natural catastrophe will be followed by a human disaster. This way we can begin to see that man's state is to a measure due to his reaction to natural situation. The purpose of man's mind and his emotional and rational and spiritual content is that man shall learn how to know nature, obey nature, protect himself from negative aspects of nature, and help nature to strengthen her own defenses on all levels of knowledge. Man, however, is not a philanthropist of this kind. It hasn't occurred to him that nature needs him. Rather, he assumes that nature is a great area waiting to be exploited by him. This situation has led to a great deal of complication. Certain very common problems that we suffered from have been brought under fair control. Although if this control was relaxed, we would soon be in difficulty again. They say that if the various medical regulations at our ports of entrance to our country were removed, that in 30 days the bubonic plague would be in America. We have to guard ourselves and watch our ways constantly. At the same time, we are vulnerable now on an entirely different level. And today we are creating new ailments. Ailments have a relation to time and place. We speak constantly of industrial ailments, of vocational ailments. And we also know that any condition in which a collective people involves itself can and will produce health problems. A totally new way of life, then, might bring with it a totally new structure of disease. And any change within a large pattern may result in a modification or an exaggeration of the aspects and symptoms of various existing ailments. We know that for many centuries, peoples were completely clear of many diseases, and that the Western Hemisphere was without some of the diseases that we have until Western migration. But these ancient peoples also had their own ailments, and they had their parallels. And epidemics striking in Europe could not directly reach America before the colonization plan began, when they were separated by an uncrossed ocean, and no one even knew the existence of the Western Hemisphere. There was certainly no communication by means of which disease could be carried. Yet epidemics in Europe and Asia, reported in the chronicles of Mexico by the Aztecs and Mayas, prove that these epidemics existed in both hemispheres, meaning that there had to be some cause beyond direct contagion. Also, the timing indicates that the mere problem of sanitation would not answer. The one thing that the two hemispheres had in common was air, atmosphere, and also the conditioning situations arising in air due to storms and droughts and similar phenomena. Thus that these phenomena in turn are caused by the heavy combinations of planets would indicate that we might expect to be able to predict or foreknow those areas of danger from a health standpoint before the condition arises. We would also have available to us the kind of information that might help in the reduction of smog, inasmuch as we could determine those periods with reasonable accuracy in which the danger would be the greatest. We could also perhaps learn more about this cleansing process of upper atmosphere. We could perhaps rearrange some of our industries in such a manner that their chemical residue would be different. And being different would again perhaps break the spell of which sameness is a requisite. Many things could be done to improve our health and many of our problems if we would get beyond ourselves and begin to think of our citizenship in a total world. If we can learn to understand the degree in which the atmosphere of various areas with different surface conditions, different magnetic fields operating, we could learn the different degrees in which these areas can absorb, we could perhaps place many of our essential and necessary industries in areas where this absorption is the greatest, and where therefore there would be the least probability of dangerous results. We also might be able to screen out more effectively the dangerous elements so that they would not require such a heavy absorption by the atmosphere itself. Man today has increased upon the surface of the earth far beyond the ancient world, and today the rate of population increase is expected to so rapidly multiply that within 100 or 200 years at the most we may have double the present population of the earth. This doubled population can only survive by the doubling of industries, by the gradual intensifying of life, and by perhaps the gradual destruction of more and more of our natural resources. More and more of our land is being destroyed in terms of alchemy. The balance of relationship between earth and atmosphere is being constantly changed. And there have been considerable speculation as to the effect of Lake Mead upon the climate of California, an artificial lake created, and the marked change in climate as a result. Artificial deserts have been created by paving huge cities with concrete. Artificial hazards are caused by cutting down of vegetation and by the carelessness which has destroyed so much of our land from the standpoint of our watersheds, especially fire. All these things affect the total life of the individual. And in this picture of a total effect, we find that periodically a situation is created which permits the emergence or the coming into total manifestation of certain corruptions. These, whether we wish to regard them as germs which suddenly gain authority and weaken structure, whether we wish to believe, as some of the ancients did, that a virus is a peculiar type of psychic organism, we can't see it, we can't get it with a filter, that this psychic organism is a byproduct of the waste of human emotion and thought. Whatever we wish to assume, we do know that when we're naughty, we do not feel good. And that the great remedy seems to be to build a reasonable, rational, common sense way of life, expecting to work with nature instead of sitting back and doing as we please forever. If through intelligent situation we learn the capacities and limitations of our earth, we can probably adjust ourselves with a maximum of integrity and a minimum of disaster. If, however, we continue to think that we live in an absolutely limitless earth, that we can do as we please forever, we will undoubtedly come to great grief. We have got to understand and cooperate with nature in the creation of the chemical situations which she needs for survival. Through cooperation, we can not only improve our physical life, but because of the relation of the psychic atmosphere upon our disposition, we can probably solve a great many of our emotional and stress problems. And out in the sky, these great planets, forming their conjunctions and squares and oppositions, coming into very definite patterns, are associated with extraordinary climatic situations, and these in turn are followed almost immediately by forms of disease. In some instances, the aspects are such that the physical changes are not obvious, and only the psychological changes are noticed. But then we have another situation. From the psychological changes, we get a reaction into physical situations, perhaps leading to war and crime. We should understand the world in order to understand how to live in it. And while we are concerned with every kind of knowledge you can imagine, it might be well to turn our attention to that form of knowledge which bears directly upon our daily living, and begin to plan a cooperative, constructive partnership with nature through an understanding of her laws and a gentle determination to obey them. Time's up. Now I'd like to call your attention to the subject for next Sunday morning, which is a long way from this one, but might have some relationship. How far can we trust ourselves and others? Now, everyone will have something to think about in connection with trusting people. Most folks are a little disillusioned, particularly as to trusting others. But it may also be well to examine our own relationship to this pattern of trustworthiness. Are we to be trusted any better than other people? Why are we not? What is there in us which detracts from trustworthiness, makes it difficult for us to keep our word? or to fulfill our obligation, or to meet an emergency with a reasonable degree of dignity. So we think that next Sunday we will have something for those persons who are in danger of being disillusioned, who have been disillusioned, or who wish to prevent themselves from being in a spot where they can be disillusioned. And I do not mean by that the answer to this problem is any kind of a grand statement, do not trust anybody. That is not the answer. We can't tell you the answer now, but we'll tell you that is not it.